And so I'm going to talk about, I guess, food mapping generally. I guess I first wonder, though, how many people went to OpenStreetMap to check where their nearest grocery store was versus Google Maps. Um, I don't know. That might be a loaded question, but if your grocery stores aren't updated in OpenStreetMap, this is the plug to get them updated. So I'll talk a bit about some of the research I've done around food mapping in Detroit. Obviously, definitely going to show a lot of really great maps. And yeah, please drop any questions you have in the chat, and I'll, I guess, try to answer those. Or I don't know if we'll break back out to a table for that part. But I'm just going to keep it going. So I do a lot of different things in Detroit around mapping and data. The main thing I do is it's called Detroitography, a map blog about Detroit. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole of historical and current maps, that's your place to go. I teach at Wayne State University in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, as well as the Department of Public Health. So teaching Intro to GIS and Public Health in the City. I help run the Maptime Detroit chapter in Detroit. I teach a community workshop on using GIS and data for community nonprofits and community projects, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then my full-time day job is I'm the GIS director for a center with a really long name at Wayne State, but we're focused on health disparities and big data. And how that all kind of plays out geospatially, not just in the city of Detroit, but in our state, the state of Michigan. I figured it'd be useful to talk about some terms before going kind of full in to all this mapping of food. So I'll mention a food system a lot, and when I say that, I'm talking about the full process that it takes for the food that you eat to get to your plate. So from the production to the processing to the distribution to where you buy it, and then the food waste process after that as well. A lot of times when I'm talking about food mapping, the topic of food security comes up, and in that it often gets kind of put at the same level as food access, but it's somewhat of a different thing. It's that people have consistent access to nutritious and culturally appropriate food, whereas access is kind of part of that food security, but there's a whole lot more that goes into it. And then since we're talking about Detroit, the food desert term is one that is totally unavoidable, although most unhelpful in our work to improve the food system in Detroit. And so, the USDA and others have a very clear definition of what that is, and it's an area with little or no access to food needed to maintain a healthy diet. But it's important to note here that access is broadly defined. It's not just distance, but also things like income and transportation that might be barriers to getting the food that you need or the food that you want. Oops, I just clicked away. And so, thinking about food access in Detroit, the majority of the city is not defined even by the USDA as a food desert. And probably a more accurate way to talk about it is an opportunity desert, where things like income and the time that it takes to either travel or deal with various processes in the city day in and day out, or waiting for the bus. The city just announced last week more service cuts to bus lines, where those things exacerbate access to good food. But then in the same token, we have a low rate of city residents that are eating fruits and vegetables every day, and a very high number of locations where people can use the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or it's called SNAP, or it's better known as food stamps. There's over over 1,200 sites in the city where you can use those, compared to the roughly 70, it's closer to 60 full line grocery stores in the city of Detroit. That's usually a number that surprises people, that there's that many grocery stores. But there are, and I've walked inside every one of them as part of this Detroit Food Map project. And you can see here the areas highlighted in orange are defined by the USDA as an official food desert, where there's low access and potentially low income as well. But then they also use, the USDA usually uses a 1 mile buffer as a kind of default access metric. So you can see where, some of the federal data is a bit lagging compared to what we can collect on the ground in a given year. And this is, the data is a little bit old. We've had a few grocery stores actually closed during the pandemic, but we're still roughly around the same number. So here is just a quick schematic of that food desert. Sometimes it's nicer to have a graphic as opposed to just a definition. So you can see they're tracking everything from production all the way around to food waste. And so access and nutrition, that's usually where I put things like grocery stores along with this retail space, depending on what kind of store operation they're running. One thing that not everyone knows about Detroit is that it also is host to a regional food hub. So we have Eastern Market, not the Eastern Market in DC, but better. No offense to DC, but it's the largest open air market in the nation, and it operates year round. And one thing we see is a lot of regional food producers. They bring all their produce into Detroit, and then it gets resold to food retailers or restaurants or other vendors that need the produce. And not as much of it gets actually distributed within the city of Detroit. But you can see here just the reach of the regional food hub. We have, I'm trying to think of all the counties that it encompasses here. But it's close to a 7 to 9 county area that gets encompassed, including Canada. We get tons of tomatoes from Canada. Shout out to anybody from Canada. Or as we say, South Detroit. But we have all these rural areas that are kind of on the edges of this food hub, and they bring all the produce into the city. So you can imagine there's also some interesting dynamics between city residents that are predominantly Black and African American, and rural farmers from these far out counties that are predominantly white. And living in a rural area. And so I had started the Detroit Food Map project when I was actually working as a community health worker in Detroit. It was a childhood obesity project, and I didn't necessarily know where to recommend people to go to look for foods. I was new to the city. I'd moved there about 2 years prior to starting this project. And so in between visiting families across the city, I started stopping at grocery stores. And I found this survey tool that cataloged kind of the availability of different foods, their pricing and quality, especially as it related to the kind of health and nutrition of the foods there. So at that time, there was a lot of question of, is Detroit a food desert? Is it not? Do we count this store? Do we not count that store? And so we had this ground truthing process and did a full survey of every grocery store in the city in 2013. So found 76 full line grocery stores, and that means it carried everything from fresh produce to having a meat counter, having dry goods, canned goods, and as well as things like dairy. So that was also the same year that Detroit got 3 national chain grocery stores. Prior to that, the last chain grocery store closed in 2007. So 2013, we got 3. So there were 2 Meijer stores and a Whole Foods, and a handful of stores that were independently owned actually reopened. And I guess just to illustrate the importance and impact of being able to assess, where those stores are and what they can do in the city, we compared that with our childhood obesity participants in the city, looking at, where are these stores and where are these participants? Do they have access, based on that 1 mile radius to the store, or does that proximity not matter? Because there's also a lot of research on Detroit that Detroiters prefer to shop outside the city. And, what we found was 87% of these families had access to a full-line grocery store that carried fruits and vegetables. Every grocery store we went into had fruits and vegetables, contrary to a lot of reporting on Detroit. You can't find an apple or a carrot. You can, no matter where you are. I'll take you there. But what we did find was, the distance didn't matter. How close you were didn't mean that you ate more fruits and vegetables. But the higher your family income, the more likely your family was to eat more fruits and vegetables. And that shouldn't really be rocket science either, but it was an important finding, not to just say in this food mapping space, if you build a new store, people will come. That's not always true. So we've been doing this data collection now as the Detroit Food Map Initiative every other year in the city so that we can track change, especially tracking where stores open and close. We also have done this for what you might call fringe food locations like dollar stores, convenience stores, and party stores, which I'm glad, I think Nathan used that term. It's a very Michigan, we don't really have corner stores or that kind of feel or mentality in Michigan, and in Detroit we have party stores. And generally there's not a lot of food in party stores. And then we've done this in a handful of other cities too, since we've had a lot of success with it. So mapping food availability in Flint after the Flint water crisis, did some work in Battle Creek, and then also in Warren and kind of the general Oakland County area of Michigan. And now we're part of a 7-city project with the Ralph Wilson Jr. Foundation, again, looking at what does this access look like in low-income neighborhoods. But then this qualitative data, I'm trained as an anthropologist, so just mapping out where the stores are and saying to someone that you have access isn't always the best. When people have experiences inside stores where they're treated poorly. It might be racism. It might just be store owners that don't want to listen when they have a problem. But people have then, perceptions of where they want to shop, which, it wasn't surprising that most Detroiters travel outside of the city because they're more likely to have a more positive experience if they're shopping at a chain store in a suburb as opposed to their independent store. Although it wasn't entirely one or the other, people really found specific pathways to the stores that they had good experiences at. And when they had a good experience at that store, they'd tell their neighbor or they'd tell their family or their congregation. And that qualitative data almost became more important than telling someone, well, you have 4 grocery stores within a 1 mile radius, so you have access. When they might say, well, really, there's only one of those stores that I'm comfortable shopping at. So I'll just for context, I'll share, that's kind of the bulk of what I have to share for tonight, so we can discuss some more, but I'll share a handful of maps just for context on Detroit. So when we did the qualitative interviews with folks all around the city, they noted that, grocery stores were the primary place where they bought food. Convenience stores were number 2. So in this case, convenience stores were like CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, and then dollar stores were right up there too. A lot of senior citizens would tell us, well, we can get all of our canned goods at the dollar store for way cheaper than we can get them at the grocery store. So we go to the dollar store first, and then we go to the grocery store after that and get everything else we need. Detroit also has a really robust network of farmers markets. There was this Fresh Corner Cafe pop-up program that doesn't exist anymore, but the Easter Market that I talked about earlier, they run a farm stand program where they have a van and a tent, and they go all around the city, kind of setting up smaller markets all throughout the week. And then there's also this coalition, it's called Detroit Community Markets. So run and hosted by a handful of churches and nonprofits all across the city, where during the summer months they have a weekly farmers market. So if you wanted to shop for fresh local produce, you could find a farmers market any day of the week in the city. Emergency food is a major topic, especially during the COVID pandemic. Detroit has a lot of different sites that you can go to. There's close to some 200 food pantries, although that number has decreased actually during the pandemic, since a lot halted operations. But again, going back to that, thinking about food security and when people don't have adequate food, where can they go? There's a lot of resources in Detroit. One other thing we just looked at quickly was sites that were approved to take WIC vouchers, which is the Women, Infants, and Children program. And with that, we found at least half of the locations were liquor stores. And we've done pilot surveying in liquor stores and basically found no food in liquor stores. So it was really unfortunate to see. I know, again, usually the criteria is access. I know there's only a certain number of WIC stores allowed within each zip code. But that didn't seem to be an argument that held up very well. The summer food program is also huge in Detroit. So I think we actually have like 400 different food providers during the summer months. So this is a program that kind of takes the place of the school meal program or the school lunch program. So in Detroit, we have 100% community eligibility, which means if you go to a Detroit public school, you're eligible for free lunch. So during the summer months when kids aren't going to those schools, all these other smaller sites provide that food for kids. And then Detroit's also known for its urban agriculture. We have, documented history of urban agriculture back to 1890, where mayors were setting aside vacant land for people to grow food on. There's, if you've heard anything about Detroit, there's quite a bit of vacant land, and there's also a lot of urban agriculture. So this is only the community gardens, but there's some 1,500 garden sites all across the city, whether it's in folks' backyard, whether it's a large-scale urban farming effort, which, large scale isn't really that large scale. I think the largest is, I want to say 7 acres, which, in the world of agriculture, that's not large at all. But so this is a map of just the 400 some community gardens, and then those large scale efforts too. I think this is my last slide. I just wanted to also throw this one in there to look at, what is the ecosystem of food in Detroit? It's kind of wildly connected and disconnected at the same time. So there's a few questions in the Q&A. Oh, should I? So for these maps, the 1 mile buffer I guess, geospatially, that's kind of the default. The USDA has tried to also kind of update their metric to be like proximity to grocery stores, which it's questionable what their data source is for grocery stores, low vehicle access, and then low income. And then they create kind of an index based on that. It's a little bit better, but still, there's a lot more that could be done. I'll always advocate for the qualitative with the quantitative for that. And then the USDA, they usually update their food desert data. It's roughly about every 5 years. Oh gosh, what year is it? So next year, I think they should have a